Welcome, my friends. This is the News Roundup podcast with Combo. Today is June the 4th. We're going to be covering the economic news. They are the background of what is unfolding in nationwide demonstrations, riots, and insurrections. I bring you a message of peace, which is not necessarily one-sided, simple, or vague. I'm looking to create a nuanced conversation with people to bridge the gap of misunderstanding. There's a lot of anger and frustration, depression all around the nation, and it is better for us to talk about it in a sensible manner than start hurting and blaming each other. And George Orwell's quote comes to mind: it is not so much staying alive, it is staying human that's important. What counts is that we don't betray each other. And if you haven't read 1984, the story goes Winston had a love interest and he was tortured endlessly by Big Brother. And at the very end, he betrayed his girlfriend. I forget what her name is, but that is where we're finding ourselves, in a country that is divided, angry, and depressed. And this is something I've covered in the past, but there's real data to measure this. This is not my opinion. The CDC has been keeping track of different situations across the nation, depression, the economic situation. This survey is to rapidly monitor recent changes in mental health and different ways that people are relating to each other due to the lockdown and economic crisis. Now, I covered an article a month ago that there's a real danger that more people could potentially die from the economic impact of COVID-19. And I outlined the data, the facts, and opinion, and the context that there is a larger consolidation and effect than that the lockdown has on the larger economy. And now we have been exacerbated the situation to many other factors, not necessarily just because some people are making a lot of money, but because of the uncertainty of where the nation is going. So here's the latest news. About 40 million Americans are now unemployed. We desperately need a plan before it's too late. This is an opinion piece, but it also has information that refers to the St. Louis Federal Reserve that had projected several plans to redeem the society's economic collapse. And let's read what this is all about. All right. The 39 million, last week, 2.44 million Americans filed first-time claims for unemployment benefits since mid-March. Roughly 39 million people have filed for unemployment. About 25% of Americans are now out of work. As bad as these numbers look, the job landscape is even worse than what is being reported. The 39 million total fails to include people who were unemployed prior to the pandemic. Back in February, before COVID-19 really hit hard, the U.S. economy had record high levels of employment. And if you actually believe what the government is posting about the employment numbers. And the really concerning thing is that the jobs that were lost, it was in the supposed economic recovery, are permanently they're lost. They're not coming back. And so the University of Chicago's Becker-Friedman Institute offers a sober prediction that 11.6 million of all jobs lost through April 25 will become permanent. Wells Fargo wrote in a research report, it is likely it will take a number of years for the labor market to recover from its pandemic-induced meltdown. And I ask you to stop inciting the rant inside of your head, if you have one, where you're blaming a comic villain or someone in the left or the right. Just let's follow the information and contextualize it, because the message of peace that I bring is complicated and nuanced and sophisticated. And I was laying in bed last night thinking, well, the left and the right, they probably are getting upset with my opinions on Facebook because I'm essentially saying some really controversial things for both the left and the right. We're personally responsible in manifesting this madness. But let's continue with the news. Brace yourself, America, for single worst job reports in history. And this is the mainstream media. Of course, the situation might be a lot worse that they let us know. Just 2 months ago, according to this article, American workers were enjoying the fruits of the lowest unemployment rate in 50 years. And that's what is the wisdom of the mainstream media. 50 years. We are enjoying the fruits of the lowest unemployment rate. Let's pretend that is true. But Friday's jobs report reflecting April's official unemployment rate is expected to show just thoroughly the economic collapse caused by the coronavirus has eviscerated the US labor market. And it's really convenient in a real political sense to just blame it on the coronavirus and not on government guidelines and the facts that had changed the perspective of the people and how people were ready to open up, but the government guidelines were in place and didn't allow them to move on and open their doors. Glassdoor economist Daniel Zhao bluntly predicts the single worst job reports in history when the Labor Department on Friday releases employment numbers for April. Okay, these weekly unemployment insurance claims provide insight. The spike in joblessness followed record-breaking unemployment claims week after week since mid-March, including Thursday reports that 3.2 million Americans applied for unemployment. This provides a very pessimistic indicator of what is happening. More people are out of work and dependent on government help to pay the rent or their bills. These weekly unemployment insurance claims provide insight into the country's larger job losses, although they may underestimate the ranks of jobless Americans because not all will apply for aid, in some cases because they are not eligible. And even if they do apply for aid, as I covered in a previous article where it talks about the controlled demolition of the economy, that's my opinion based on the facts and the research that I've conducted. This is the conclusion that I reached because the small business loan scam, there was an interview by a person who was a loan officer working for the Small Business Association that was giving out these different loans. He essentially said that the big change, the big business and the scammers got all the free money. Meanwhile, the people who really needed it, they are waiting for it and are still praying for it. And if you're interested, you can follow the data information on this article. And 1 in 5, okay, 1/5 of Americans fear they can't pay June's rent or mortgage, federal survey finds. More than half of California households have seen a loss of income due to the coronavirus pandemic, the U.S. Census Bureau said Wednesday. Okay, let's continue reading. Since March 13, 54.5% of California adults surveyed said they or another adult in their home had lost income, and an additional 40.8% expect their household to earn less from work over the next 4 weeks. This is the pattern, and it's easy to say, well, it's a Democrat hellhole. They created this mess on their own. They're just desserts. And that type of mentality can be carried over to the very same person who's saying that. In other words, it's more telling to project that blame and say, oh, it's just the blue team that made this economic collapse happen. No, it's a bigger picture, and it's a red and blue collusion. The findings come from the first release of data from a new weekly survey conducted by the Bureau to try to gauge how the outbreak is affecting Americans. So the CDC survey I talked about here on A Country Divided, Depressed, and Angry is measuring the unemployment and how people are reacting. And, shortly the public will be unable to reason or think for themselves. They will only be able to parrot the information they've given on the previous news nights. And they riddled our mind. They fragmented our psyche through a trauma-based conditioning. And not only through our trauma-based conditioning did they program our own demise, but also because of our pleasure conditioning, our operant conditioning. In the sense, what I mean by that is, well, we were too busy with pleasure and we didn't really care, and we numbed ourselves that way. So now there's another surplus pleasure, and that is rage. The rage that comes with having all of this bad stuff happening and wanting to say something about it and wanting to speak about it, but having half-truths and limited facts and going with our righteous indignation and condemning anyone we see. That's the pleasure we get from moral, righteous indignation. it's a psychological thing, it's a political thing, but it's an individual thing. And nationally, 47% adults, according to the survey from the CDC, 47% adults said they or another adult in their home had lost employment income since March 13th, and 39% expected their household to earn less from work over the next 4 weeks. When we saw those numbers, we were very surprised. Speaking at a Brookings institution after the numbers were released, Velkoff noted that the person being Victoria Velkoff, Associate Director for Demographic Programs at the Bureau, and she is saying the following: noted that the new survey asked about income loss, not unemployment. So the results differ from national job figures. Some 36 million Americans have filed unemployment insurance claims since the coronavirus struck, and that's a very good indicator. The insurance, the insurance claims are very good indicator because it shows how many people are wanting money now and don't have it. All right, millions of Americans skip payments as tidal waves of defaults and evictions loom. All right, Americans are skipping payments on mortgages, auto loans, and other bills. Normally, that could mean massive foreclosures, evictions, car repossessions, and people's credits getting destroyed. But much of that has been put on pause. Help from Congress and leniency from lenders have kept impending financial disasters at bay for millions of people. And this is a duplicitous line, half information, half truth, and a little perversion in between. Because if you look at the context, the larger picture, we're with NPR, and it's a mainstream, neutral supposed media outlet. But in reality, if you backtrack what is happening and the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve, there is a real measurable effect that is inequality. People call it inequality, but it's what is manifesting is just an effect. What is the cost? The effect might be inequality. Well, what is the cost? The cost is called the quintillion effect. The quintillion effect is let's define it over here. The quintillion effect, the so-called quintillion effect, describes the uneven expansion of the amount of money. If a central bank pumps more money into the economy, the resulting increase in price does not happen evenly. The Austrian economist Friedrich August von Hayek compared this monetary expansion with honey. If you pour honey into a cup, it won't spread out evenly. It will clump in the middle of the cup first before spreading out. So that's the quintillion effect. And to use that analogy, while the government and banks are printing money, or the government is authorizing the Federal Reserve to print more money and buy junk debt from all these zombie corporations, they are accruing or collect, or the money, the cheap credit or the money that they print goes directly to the 1% or the 1%, like it's a very tiny minority that is interconnected in banking, political interest, and it's not a capitalist society. And even if we do embrace socialism, it won't fix the problems. It will exacerbate the whole mess of things. And if we really want to help our fellow man, we need to get informed and look at the facts that are outside of our narrative and our cultural context, and look beyond, because again, we're living in a very interesting time, and the news just keep piling up and getting worse and worse and worse. And covering this as it unfolds is it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy because you're looking at it all and you get lost, and then the next event and crisis happens, and people get angry, frustrated, they express their convictions, and then people will forget about the victims, the lost jobs, and all the mean things everyone said to each other. And then friendships get disconnected and people move on, and they become isolated, frustrated, and totally unemployable. So that's the main objective here, to bring a message of peace. But I'm not saying that, Black lives do not matter. I'm not saying that, the Republicans are evil and wrong. I'm not saying that the Democrats should suffer the consequences that they brought about because of their socialist policies. That is not something I'm going to get involved with. I'm talking to the human, to the individual who wants to evolve and go to the next step of human evolution. Remember that this is sophisticated, nuanced information battle war. It's an information war, and it manifests itself in the vector of simulations. But in the real battlefield is the imagination, the heart. Once we really creatively embrace our imagination, our intuition, we can move past this stuff. And with normal human engagement, we can really build society from the ground up really, really quickly. I know it sounds like an idealistic utopian thing, but if you research history and how societies function and the distribution of power and all these other different aspects of philosophy, history, and psychology, you eventually go down to the same simplistic realization. Normal human engagement produces wealth and prosperity and peace. A society based on coercion, violence, and fraud through the state, through a monopoly of force, eventually creates the problems that will demise their own society that they created for generations. Anyways, 1/3 of America's record unemployment payout hasn't arrived. So just like I talked in my other article long ago, the controlled demolition of the economy, and some of the people who are waiting on their bailouts are still waiting. They haven't received anything. And that's a terrible thing, but that's what happens when we rely or become dependent on government. We just keep waiting and waiting and praying, and nothing happens. All right. And almost 1/3 of unemployment benefits estimated to be owed to the millions of Americans who lost their jobs as a result of the coronavirus slump haven't been paid yet, as flagship policies struggle to cope with the unprecedented wave of layoffs. The Treasury disbursed $147 billion in unemployment benefits in the 3 months through May, according to data published Monday. The safety net. The gaps in America's social safety net are becoming apparent at the same time as protests erupt over longstanding racial inequities. All right. And the longstanding racial inequities are manifesting in different ways. And it's very, very politically convenient, again, when we go down to the bigger picture, to say that this is a racial inequality and simply it manifests in that lens. No, there's a bigger problem. I live in North Carolina. There is racism. People have been racist to me. They have excluded me. I have lost job opportunities because of some petty racist asshole who happens to be my boss. And I did not hurt myself and I did not hurt others. I befriended my white fellow man, and my best friend here in North Carolina, he happens to be Scott Irish, and he has employed me and has helped me tremendously and extended an olive branch to me. And in that, I love it because we found meaning and creative, spontaneous friendship in the midst of all this racial history that North Carolina is clouded by. So yes, I'm not ignoring the past of what this country is founded on ethical, violent action and insurrection, fraud, coercion, and violence. And we're in some way or the other complicit in further dividing people. So that's what the message of peace that I'm trying to impart onto you. But if we just keep on doing the same thing, getting upset, blaming others, and not actually researching what is the pattern of control, because the pattern of control is economic, and that is the biggest inequality that exists. Economic inequality, but that economic inequality is an effect of the Cantillon effect. It's a cost. The cost is money being printed by bankers at their own particular interests and powering up corporations that don't represent the local economy, but are just big businesses that are interconnected by government, and politicians, businesses, bankers, and big tech. They all profit off the lockdown. Well, is it just my opinion, or is this something that has actually been discovered through the news media and research? Yes, there is research showing that Amazon reaps $11,000 a second during the coronavirus lockdown bonanza. You were allowed to go to Walmart. You were allowed to go to different places, big stores. But if you were go to local businesses, private ones, non-essential, remember, the government chose who the winners and the losers are, and the winners are big business. The losers are the people waiting for their handouts. The online retailer Amazon has been described as a clear winner from the coronavirus crisis. Its share price surging by more than third inside a month. Its customers spending almost $11,000 a second on its products and services, and its owner, Jeff Bezos, reinforcing his position as the world's richest person with a fortune of $138 billion. And if you really cared in like unions and you consider yourself a socialist and you want to help people in the working class, well, hurting private businesses and calling for a government lockdown is not necessarily going to produce effective, long-lasting results. It's going to help the big business class, the banking class, and eventually the government. So that's an important thing to remember, that we could still follow and pursue our dreams. If you want to be a socialist, if you want to be a communist, you're welcome to do that. But once you start putting the government force and a gun or a barrel in somebody's face, or physical violence, then the person on the receiving end of that violence, well, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to run you over. They're going to shoot you. They're going to fight. And that's how the Civil War starts. And that's what is unfolding behind our screens. It was a cultural war between those on the left and the right, and the social justice warriors, the conservative ones and the liberal ones. They all had an invested stake in gaining the moral high ground. And while we're all gaining the moral high ground, the Federal Reserve is finding ways to fix the economy and create more economic inequality. All right, so now this is negative interest rates could be needed for a V recovery. So previously we talked about the Cantillon effect, when the bank pumps a bunch of money, but it only goes to the main big shots. And these big shots, they say that they're the gods of the marketplace, but they're not geniuses. They just got a bunch of free money and got to dump it into other stuff that had a huge return. If you have free money, unlimited credit, and you had no risk, what do you think you will be? You probably be one of these multi-billionaire people. And there's a lot of history behind a person like Bill Gates, who made a bunch of money through the use of the legal system, exploiting it, co-opting it to create a monopoly of Microsoft. And that's the story. And James Corbett talked about this, and behind the story behind Bill Gates, look into that if you're interested. All right, so the money is being printed limitless. There's trillions of dollars being printed. And now the negative interest rates could be needed for a V recovery, or for an upside recovery. Getting the U.S. economy back to strong growth could require negative interest rates, as many economists dismiss the likelihood of the current breaking slump being followed by an equally aggressive recovery central bank. Economist Yi Wen said in a paper on the St. Louis Fed website that achieving that kind of rebound is necessary and possible. The key, he said, is using aggressive stimulus even beyond what authorities deployed during the financial crisis, and that could include taking interest rates below zero. All right, before I move on to the next article, and like the trillions of dollars that has been previously printed, the negative interest rates means that while you have money in a perfect world where the government is not corrupting everything and the economy is not fixed, you will have a banking account where your money earns interest, because there's value in the money that you have. And interest is a time appreciation. You know, the more you save for the future, the more your money grows. There's more value to it, you know. But in this inverted world where economic values and virtue, just in general, philosophical Aristotelian values are inverted, and up is down, down is up. So time, money, that doesn't have value. So a negative interest rate, meaning that you have to spend your money today, because tomorrow it won't mean anything and won't have the same value. So it's supposed to spur consumption, and this society is based on consumption, buying all these different things. But because all these people are not able to even spend the money, that they don't have enough money to spend, and the money that they are able to spend is basically not even going to cover their rent, their cars, and all the other stuff that they have they have debt, and that's the society we live in, and that's going to break. But the solution, according to a Fed economist, and like before, I've mentioned the St. Louis Fed on one of my articles, they had projected that there was going to be millions of unemployed people. I'm trying to find the source here in my article, but it's a little bit on the bottom over here. That's what you do. This is what happens when you have someone who doesn't have a script and does it right at the top of his head. He's always scrambling around getting these articles, but here it is. All right, the Federal Reserve, the federal government stimulus package, most government programs, come with unintended consequences. While the federal government pays lip service to the outrage, the wholesale looting of America continue. The guidance doesn't change the formal rules of the program and wouldn't necessarily stop. All right, sorry, I'm reading the wrong thing. The optics of the privately owned banking cartel, the Federal Reserve, projected March 13, 47.5 million people being laid off in the second quarter of 2020. And that projection is coming true. You know, there's 40 million people of unemployed, 39 million, around 40 million people are claiming job insurance. You know, they're claiming unemployment benefits. right? So that is happening all in the background, and it continues to get exacerbated. But there's been trillions of dollars printed, trillions. Okay. Okay, there's trillions of dollars being printed, and the point that I'm trying to make is that if the government could just continue printing trillions of dollars, I think the statistics are 6.5 trillion the last couple of years, and in the last year's tax revenue was 3.5 trillion. And I'll have to look at the sources and indication and evidence behind that, but that's the research that I've had made in the past. And if you have any sources to share, I welcome it. But the point of it is, if the government can print all this money, and if we could just print ourselves out of problems, then why are we paying taxes? Then why are we working? There's a real fundamental disconnect between reality and what the government tells us. So we need to pay attention to that, that if we're calling for more government programs, we're essentially stealing from our future value and spending it today. And with the negative interest rates, that is going to exacerbate the problem where there is no real valuation for tomorrow. There's no hope for tomorrow. We got to spend today and live it up. So that's a problem. And it's going to play out tremendously bad throughout this year, because we have a culture that happens to be against private business, even if you have the right opinions or the wrong opinions. So I'm turning this down to a local perspective. In my opinion, we should all be looking at through the national, state, and local perspective. We should have a global perspective, but act locally. And we have to ask ourselves, what type of society are we going to embrace? What type of place are we going to frequent? Those are very important questions. And one of these things, the reason that that's an important question is because it's playing out in our simulated reality. Okay, there's a local story about someone having wrong opinions and being banned and canceled from operating their business in a particular venue. Laredo food truck asked to leave beer garden after remarks on Black Lives Matter's protest surface. And this is related to the message of peace, and to the beginning quote about George Orwell: is not enough to be human, but that we don't betray each other. It's not enough to survive, but that we don't betray each other. Woke Amole, an Asian-inspired Texas-Mexican food truck, has been asked to leave Cultura Beer Garden after alleged remarks about the Black Lives Matter protests made by the truck's owner surfaced online. Screen captures taken from the posts that have now gone viral show a conversation between two Instagram users. A conversation in a controlled platform owned by corporate overlords, Instagram. One of the accounts has been reportedly confirmed to be owned by Guacamole owner Steven Salas. Steven Salas, if you're hearing this news report, I'm sorry that you had the wrong opinions and you have been canceled. In the screenshots, the account believed to be owned by Salas is pictured stating, "I really don't care about the BLM movement and we will never get rid of racism. And I think this protest is bullshit." All right. And, this is inspiring a lot of people to get to the streets and organize and demonstrate their resistance against the powers that shouldn't be. But, okay, let's continue this article. The veracity of the screenshots were confirmed after the Guacamole Facebook account responded to a post sharing the messages. According to the restaurant's response, Sosa's comments were made through a direct message on his personal account. He is not, according to the person they quoted, he's not the only worker at a Guacamole. There are more of us who certainly support the BLM movement and it all represents, who also depend on the income we get from working on there. One person doesn't get to speak for us. Okay, but one person can still express their opinion, and that's not possible in this dialectic, in this controlled conversation that is occurring in these platforms. The message goes on to say that they have asked Guacamole to leave the premise. The owner of Cultura Beer Garden responded shortly after the post went viral, posting their own message in support of the Black community. From our little corner in Laredo, Cultura Beer Garden stands with you, Black Lives Matter, and all who are in fight for your justice. We hear you, we see you, the message states. We have tried to create a place where music, art, craft, beer, and culture are all welcome and loved. We have decided to break the silence and speak out. We do not condone racism. And let's be explicit about the comments made by someone that had the wrong opinion. He didn't explicitly say, I hate black people. He didn't say all that. Simply put it, he said he will never get rid of racism, and I think the protest is bullshit. That's what he thinks. He's incorrect. I don't think the protests are bullshit. I think that there is something beyond what we're looking at the screen, and I think that there is all these opportunists, provocateurs, and they manifest in Antifa, they manifest as white nationalists, they manifest as government, they manifest as just some crazy guy who wants some free stuff. Let's just step back from our emotional reaction and realize that what is unfolding on the streets, the Black Lives Movement, the protests, the demonstrators who are peaceful at the same time, they are not the ones that are underlying in the media narrative. The media will have you blaming the wrong people and hurting the wrong people instead of extending an olive branch, because some people will conflate private business ownership with part of the power structure that is destroying humanity. And I'm way beyond the left and the right, but for someone who's actually led the literature of the left-leaning people, this is a total misconception. If you're targeting people who are private business owners, you don't understand what is going on in the big picture. And the civil structures of power, if you're rebelling against that and rioting against that, it makes better sense. And I'm not advocating, I'm not condoning, and I'm not promoting anything. It makes better sense to focus your indignation onto the people that actually hold authority or governmental powers instead of the victims who are just playing along with the whole scam that is unfolding in the media. Conversation, engagement, humanity, compassion, all that stuff will resolve things. Righteous indignation, unbridled anger that destroys those who are trying to protect, who we claim to try to protect, doesn't go anywhere. And that's the main problem. This is just going to help people realize that political action doesn't go anywhere and that they need to be radicalized, extreme, and in your face to get any real meaningful change. And that will just create a better opportunity for the government to clamp down through the only means that they are best at, and that's with violent domination, force. Once the media creates this perspective in you, you're going to pretend that you are informed, and you're going to arm yourself with these half-truths and go hurt your fellow man. Malcolm X, the media is the most powerful entity on earth. They have the power to make the innocent guilty and make the guilty innocent. They control the minds of the masses. Malcolm X. I'm quoting him because there is a difference between 1960s and 2020. People say we are rioting or protesting or demonstrating like 1968. My opinion on that is, if you live in 1968 and you're operating with the same tactics as the demonstrators and organizers that were active in that moment, and you haven't improved or upgraded or become more sophisticated, then you haven't caught up to the larger perspective. The larger perspective is that the method of control is divide and conquer, COINTELPRO. The CIA, I gotta look for this manual. All right, the CIA has a simple manual of sabotage that has been effective in dividing and conquering different groups. And they did the same thing with the Black Panthers. The FBI infiltrated them and they got a snitch to tattle on everyone else and give the floor plans of their headquarters, and that was how they helped. Your value is conscious over here. Pages advertised. Okay, yeah, all right. I'll donate. I think that's what we all say. Yeah. Anyways. Okay, so the CIA Simple Sabotage Field Manual, a timeless guide to subverting any organization with purposeful stupidity. All right. This is an important document that all activists, all demonstrators, peaceful, need to understand, that government sends cops dressed as provocateurs, and they destroy buildings and get the party started, And then, we comes into question the mystery of the bricks just being of laying there, so there's a reason that they are inspiring or inciting violence, and that it's the reaction. It's all based on the reaction. And that's just the news for today. It's been a long-winded news roundup podcast, but the message of peace is a sophisticated, nuance. Message. Here we go. We're left and the right. We're both responsible. However, let's read what the patterns of control are. Let's not get divisive and angry. If we target local business owners, we're essentially robbing value from the community and allowing for big businesses to continue to grow unimpeded. And the pattern that has shown in the lockdown and in this riots or demonstrations, depending on what is happening, it's not a cohesive narrative movement. There are so many people who are ready to jump and co-opt this and use it as an opportunity and as a platform to make themselves leaders of the movement. And this happens so often. It happens in Ferguson, Baltimore, happens in Acapulco. And once everybody's gone and their convictions have waned, the real damage can occur at night when everyone starts getting crazy and hollering and the crowd dispersed. That's when the real opportunists come and loot. And there's real examples of positive people taking action and responsibility and guarding buildings with arms. If you believe that the government is really out there systematically oppressing people, then target the government. Don't target people who are local business owners, because their natural right is to have free enterprise, arm themselves, and defend their property. That is just the natural right. And it's nothing to do with anyone's toxic opinion. If you don't want to associate with someone who doesn't share the same opinion as you do, that is not a long-term, productive, effective thing you can do. Maybe short-term, you can gather a mob and target someone and excommunicate them from the economy. By excommunicate, I mean they don't even, come on, this is not a religion. This is not just something we all have to sign up to. There's just so much more we got to get into, but we're going to get, this is the final end. This is the conclusion. And I hope that you find the information useful. Remember, try to go beyond the divisive conflict and normalize your own enterprise, and don't let anyone shame you into submission, because if you consent to the crowd bullying you, then you're not going to have any meaningful value. And the people who are getting into crowds and bullying others because they don't have the right opinion. It's funny how the left acts like bullies too, huh? Then you're doing yourself a disservice. The people who are supposed to helping you and protect you and allying you, you're excommunicating them. Humans, we're here to watch out for each other. We're not here to be tribal endlessly and fight. This is your friend, Hector Combo. It's been a long one. Until then.